It's intermission time. It's great to get out to the movies.
Timothy, can you introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, how you describe yourself, where you are right now, actually, since this is virtual? Curious what you're up to.
Sure. So, hello, my name is Tim Bogart. I'm the writer, director, and producer of the new film Juliet and Romeo. I am currently in Toronto, although I think yesterday I was in New York, and then next week I'm going to Dallas, then back to New York, then off to the UK. So all in the great spirit of launching the film, which is exciting.
Madness. Where's home for you?
That's a very funny question. Where is home for me? Home used to be 1,000 years ago, Los Angeles. Then I was doing another movie on the East Coast, and so I was in New Jersey for a while. But for my latest film, I actually moved to Italy for almost 3 years to go prep, shoot, post, and really build out this film and franchise in Italy. So my home is really Italy. I just came back really just at the end of the year, just the last couple of months, just to get ready for the release.
Wow, what a dream.
It is. It is. It's a long career, but that's a pretty cool place to go make movies in Italy.
Yeah. It could be worse.
It could absolutely be worse.
So this is a question we ask everyone that comes on the show. It's a little tricky, potentially, but if you could pick a film that describes your life right now, what would you pick? Oh,
I'm going to give you a really strange... God, I'm going to give you a very strange answer.
I hope so.
I'm going to say All That Jazz. And I know that's going to be like, what? It happens to be my favorite movie ever. But that's not the only reason, although it is. It is so much the brilliance of Fosse's just extraordinary self-analysis in that film. Bolder than I think anyone has ever said, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm going through. These are my challenges. These are my obstacles. And just the breathtaking way he explored his life through art. It feels a little heady, but I certainly feel that so much of what I've been working on these last number of years is so self-reflective. And if there's one kind of touchstone of all films that I always return to, it is always All That Jazz. So it's probably not surprising. The great opening line, "To be on the wire is life, everything else is waiting," I think is every day of my life. Like we're on the wire every day.
I love that. And it's pretty on brand for what we'll get into and your background too. So that's a great answer.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so now we're going to get into our section that's a little more just like general movie taste, getting to know you.
Sure.
The first one, I guess, is a little bit more about your background and your family. So you grew up, or how did growing up around Casablanca Records shape your approach to film?
Oh, gosh, what a great question. So Casablanca was such a dream factory. And the basic premise of that world was anything was possible. And there was nothing... No such thing as larger than life. Like everything should be big, everything should be bold, everything should be exciting. So as a young kid, literally, I would go after school every day to the Casablanca offices. And that's where I would sit while they were designing the future of the Village People, while they were designing the future of Kiss or Donna Summer. So the extraordinary visuals, the extraordinary just fan engagement and knowing that, creating things like the Kiss Army, everything was about creating experiences. And so certainly as a storyteller, be it a film or television or live stage, the idea that this art that we were doing was all about fan engagement and all about creating something that was experiential, absolutely informed every single thing I've ever done since. And so it was really being in the heart of just a dream factory of pure creatives that was unbelievably inspiring.
Do you think that Spinning Gold was a love letter to that era?
There's no question, both good and bad. So there's no question that Spinning Gold was a love letter to my father, to my mother, to my stepmother, to my aunts and uncles, to my aunts and uncles like Donna or like Gene Simmons, who were really like people that I grew up with. A love letter to music, a love letter to that time. Ultimately, and I knew this going in, the son trying to tell the story of the father was always going to be looked at as, And it's funny because, you can't help it. You look at reviews and things. And to see the fan base really seemed to engage the film and love it. There was a lot of critics who really did come out feeling like I had whitewashed the story and were really taken back by that. I think that's funny. I know you said I can swear a little bit, but, I'm showing my dad fucking this person, fucking that person. I'm showing, everybody's doing coke. Like That's a very, I didn't whitewash anything in that story.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the conversation I had to have with my mother after she saw the film. Like, how could you do that? So it was absolutely a love letter. Ultimately, it was something I had to do. It was something, literally from the moment he passed, I was very young, but it was something constant. When is someone going to tell the story? So it became this rocks on my back, this burden to carry, and I'm thrilled to have done it. But absolutely, my mission was a love letter.
Was there movies early on in your life that shaped your taste and your style that you have now that stand out to you?
I really do think that critical films in my youth absolutely directed my style. And it's funny that I brought up all that jazz, because that really is perhaps, number 1 through 10 of most important influences on me. It was funny. I was actually at NYU. I was a young kid. I was probably 17 because I went when I was young. I was at NYU and I was living on 13th Street. And I remember looking out the window, and there was a small cinema called the Quad Cinema in New York. And it was showing all that jazz. And I thought, I remember that my father put out the soundtrack to that movie about Broadway. I didn't know anything about it. I don't know why I didn't know anything about it. I just literally had never really studied Fosse at that time when I was 17. So I decided I'm going to go see that movie just for the heck of it, just because I knew my father had released the soundtrack. So I go to the 10 a.m. screening. I think I'm probably the only one in the theater. I don't remember exactly, but there weren't very many people. I stood there with my mouth open, just in utter awe of what Fosse was able to do with the tools of cinema, with sound, with editing, the way his script played in on itself on 17 different levels. Finished the film at 12, went back in again. Saw the next one. I stayed 5 times straight all day long. I swear to God, I did. I did that one other time when I accidentally happened into Back to the Future. But on all that jazz, I watched it 5 times. Then I knew the projectionist because I was living there for a couple of years. And this was a time when there was film, not video. So I went to NYU, got an old CP 16 millimeter camera, and I convinced my buddy, the projectionist, to let me, God, I hope I get in trouble for this, film the movie. This is before, you couldn't pirate anything back at this time. But so I filmed the movie so I could study it. I then developed the movie. I had a Steenbeck editing bed in my apartment. And for the entire NYU year, on my own, having nothing to do with class, I would watch frame by frame all that jazz to try to understand how he did it, what he did. And so it really was one of the great educations of my life. I then became an enormous Fosse buff and dove into that incredibly. At the same time, I'll tell you, just barely nothing better than Jaws or Raiders of the Lost Ark either. So my instincts are kind of, and my personal
classics.
passions, they are all classics, but definitely you don't get much further from all that jazz and Jaws, or those things. So pretty wide-ranging interests. But all that jazz definitely was the inspiration. Just kept coming back and back and back.
I love this. That was a great story. I really can picture that.
I hope I don't get in trouble with that.
No.
I remember sitting in my apartment just watching frame by frame. Go, that shot's 4 frames. Why did you do that? It was fascinating.
Do you prefer stage musicals or something more cinematic, like the Tick, Tick, Boom, the La La Lands, all of those?
That's a fabulous question because it goes to... So I've done a lot of music-centric pieces over the course of my career. Understandably, the music kind of ran through my bones. That said, I've always believed there's 2 kinds of musicals, right? There's the musical where like the milkman is walking down the street and is singing and he knows he's in a musical. And even the cow knows that it's in a musical. And it's just like the cow is going to sing. So it's so self-referential and aware, which just was never my cup of tea. And so when you talk about something like Tick, Tick, Boom, boy, did I love that film. I thought it was a completely different approach. And for me, the idea that music was part of our inner voice, part of our expression, not literal, and not trying to say, hey, let's all put on a show and dance number, but get into the heart and soul, the aching of these characters through song is something I always felt from a musical standpoint. That's where I went. Growing up, I remember another great story. The first Broadway show I ever watched was Sweeney Todd with Len Cariou and Angela Lansbury. And I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And I remember sitting in the theater, not to spoil it for anyone because everyone's seen Sweeney Todd, I think. And he dies at the end, right? His throat is cut and he's dead. And I remember exhaling at the time when he died and feeling this relief as a 10-year-old kid. And then Len Cariou got up to take his bow and it scared the shit out of me. I thought he had died. that show was so brilliant in not going, oh, let's put on a song, but this is this scary aching of these characters. So I've always been drawn more to that kind of piece. And I love the Tick, Tick, Boom reference. That's very much the kind of musical I adore versus something that's sort of more, and now here's the next song and here's the next song, which I just never felt really moved the plot or engaged us as much. And so it was never my particular cup of tea. And I started in musical theater as an actor. And so I have a great place for that. Matter of fact, it was, so having done all sorts of things as an actor when I was younger, I remember I was playing Judas in Jesus Christ Superstar, in a big city production in Boston. And we were, in final days of rehearsals, and I had this the Judas character has this huge death scene, and I'm up on this scaffold with this, crazy rope, and the director decides there should be 15 women dancing in front of me during my death scene. And I remember not really liking that and going up to the director going, why are we doing this? And she couldn't answer the question. I remember feeling instantly, I think I need to do that job. And it really was. I was probably only maybe 18 or 19, where I said, I can't be this actor. I need to be that person. And that's really what I started directing. And started directing on the stage. But even musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar felt just from a different place. So that always kind of ran deep with me.
I love that. And I love that musical. I haven't thought about that in a long time. Very cool.
It's great.
What is a non-musical you wish was a musical? Something maybe like 500 Days of Summer, like a rom-com, or if you have one that comes to mind.
It's interesting. Yeah, by the way, 500 Days of Summer is a great idea. The moment you said it, I was like, I can see that as a musical.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think it's the same, potential objection that some people may have to my take on Juliet and Romeo. I've always struggled a little bit with the sort of classic films that just go, let's make a musical of it, and I've seen, whether it's Ghost or Pretty Woman, and these are more kind of recent stuff. You're like, okay, Mrs. Doubtfire.
That's
or Tootsie,
the case with Death Becomes Her, right?
I see everything, and I just saw it, and I watched it, and I was like, okay. And I said it was bad. It's just like, I don't know why it exists. I don't know what it's adding to the canon. I don't know what it's adding to the conversation. And what I was always trying to do with this adaptation and other things that I've done is really find another color and find another way in. And so I struggle finding something like that because I don't think it's so much about the story, but about the reason the story has a place to exist within the musical world. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges many people have, is the feeling that we can add music to anything. That's not true. I mean, you can, but why? So I've always looked at where can we add it that it raises the conversation, it raises the architecture of what we're trying to do. And again, people will go, but Romeo and Juliet, well, wait until you see it. And hopefully people will understand why we thought that was a way into these younger characters' souls.
What do musicals let you express that traditional dramas don't?
Musicals allow you to express inner voice in a way that traditional dramas just don't. And, again, not to directly tie to this particular movie, but that's what Shakespeare was so genius at, was the inner voice of his characters. Is why he always had the character of Chorus that came out and said, two households, both, it told us the story. And so, obviously cinema itself is a visual language. And I think that that's one of the most important distinctions between stage or even traditional television. In the olden days, television has now changed completely. But film is such a cinematic visual language that we think about that first. We don't necessarily always think about other elements. Obviously, we think about how important music is in any kind of piece. But so singing is just another version of that. Why do we love music? Because it takes us emotionally to a place that the cinema just doesn't quite, or that the dialogue doesn't quite, but something that it's Ennio Morricone, and suddenly, oh my gosh, I'm watching The Mission, and the most amazing sort of music began. So singing is just another version of how we tap into ourselves. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and there's on a moment in her life she hasn't had music playing somewhere. It's in her headphones on the subway, and her friends, all the same thing. Music is their inner life, and so we're just taking that out and expanding how it applies to cinema. So I just think people don't necessarily think as much, perhaps, as how much that can drive that emotion. But boy, it does in a way that no line of dialogue I could ever write perhaps gets you in the way that right look with that right little harpsichord will do. It's just something different.
Now, just to general movie taste and what you're consuming, are there genres that you typically don't watch or avoid, like horror or found film, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, as a general rule, I try to consume everything as a student of this particular art. So I really try to see everything. That said, for whatever reason, I've never really been a fan of horror. Now, I remember really young, perhaps with some maybe questionable parenting choices as a young kid, where I was brought to perhaps, like the first Halloween and the second, maybe I shouldn't have been. So maybe it threw me a little bit. But I've never really been into the pure shock and the pure horror of it. And similarly, just for whatever reason, pure camp, kind of really outlandish comedy, not terribly my thing. I've always loved comedy, just with a little bit more bite to it. So definitely horror, probably not.
Okay, valid. I want to hear your thoughts on the current wave of musicals that we have out, like Wonka, Wicked, Mean Girls.
Yep.
Some quick thoughts.
Well, my quick thoughts on the current state of musicals is funny because, not just as a writer-director, but as a producer, it's always, musicals are so hard. But every year, some of the biggest movies are always musicals. So just like any other genre, you can make bad movies, you can make good movies that connect or don't connect. But I think it's one of the greatest genres there's ever been. I think it's probably one of the greatest consistent genres that's ever worked because it is about eventizing the experience. And today, more than ever, on a theatrical basis, we have to have events. So when I look at the current state, everyone's, oh no, bad. Oh no, coming out of a year with Wicked, with Amelia Perez, with Kiss of the Spider Woman coming out. Before that, yes, Mean Girls. I mean, it just, by the way, same year, A Complete Unknown, maybe not pure musical, but certainly a truly musical film. So I think we're in one of the great moments. It's funny, literally every day I'm reading another movie musical, while on the other column of the trades, people are going, oh, don't do movie musicals. So I think that's an odd thing that everyone just wants to find reasons to not do things. I do think musicals, when done right, work. I think a drama, when done right, I think it does. But I think musicals have an otherness to them that eventizes, and I think that we're in a golden age of that. I just don't think we've ever left the golden age of that. I think there'll be a couple that don't work, and then a couple that work brilliantly.
Do you have a filmmaker or actor whose choices always interest you, and you will always go and see work that they make or are in?
For the most part, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, I know how hard this is. So I, no matter what, always have a respect to anybody who somehow in any way gets to fade out at the end. Like, it's such an unbelievable Sisyphusian journey up that mountain. I'm always blown away. And so my general take has always been, I would rather filmmakers who are so pushing the boundaries that it's worth something new that I haven't seen before, even if I don't necessarily love it, versus just kind of, more traditional kind of paint by numbers, perfectly fine and important, but maybe not the stuff that gets me necessarily out to go. When I think, obviously one of the great successes of all time, when you think about someone like Chris Nolan, he just can't make a decision that's not interesting. You may not go, oh, I don't like, this movie because it runs backwards and it's strange, but boy, it's interesting, right? Interstellar might be too this, but gosh, that's interesting. So someone like Chris, I always just found so brilliant. But look, on the flip side, someone like Cameron, who is so unbelievably, unabashedly commercial, but who literally with everything he does changes technology, changes the way we look at how to make these things. Boy, I'm always fascinated to see something he just did. I've been desperately waiting to see Sinners because Coogler is another guy who just seems to not miss the opportunity to be bold. So I gravitate towards that boldness every single time, and there are just some spectacular filmmakers doing it.
Definitely. Okay, and to wrap up this section about your general film taste, I want to hear a film that you've seen this past year that really stuck with you, and then a film that hasn't come out yet or is out and you just haven't seen it yet that you're looking forward to.
Something that stuck with me. I will tell you, Amelia Perez really did stick with me. I know there's a lot of chaos around it, but when you think about the boldness of the choices, not just of the director and obviously the creator, but of each one of the actresses and the actors as well. I don't know that you could look at that film and go, yeah, I saw something like that last week. Just every choice. Yeah. And yet was done with such boldness and such strength. It just had me from beginning to end. I was wildly impressed by that film, just wildly impressed. In terms of something I haven't seen yet, Sinners. I'm just desperately to see it. I'm going to see it this weekend. I've been dying to see it.
Okay, now I have a game called This or That Film Edition. I'm going to say 2 scenarios, just kind of a little rapid fire, and you just pick which you prefer.
Okay.
Okay, first, you can only film on green screen for the rest of your career, or you can only shoot with a handheld VHS camcorder.
VHS camcorder, no question.
Your next film can only be 100% practical effects, or your next film can only use early 2000s CGI.
Practical effects.
Yeah, practical effects are cool.
Love
especially
them.
In the world of musical.
Yeah.
Make a musical adaptation of Oppenheimer, or make a gritty reboot of High School Musical.
Oppenheimer.
That would be crazy.
That would be very cool. I have to call my brother on that one.
Your next project is backed by A24, but they rewrite half of the script. Or it's fully your vision, but produced by Netflix with no marketing.
A24. I love their work. I think they're so cool.
Work with a composer who insists on only using TikTok trending sounds. Or a cinematographer who insists on shooting everything in vertical format.
That's my favorite question. I'm going to have to go with the sounds. I can't go vertical.
Yeah, it's crazy that's...
My mind doesn't work that way.
Okay, last 2. Make a 3-hour Baz Luhrmann style remix of The Notebook, or a stripped back A24 style remake of Grease.
Oh, Grease with A24. Fantastic.
And then the last one, get your dream cast but no music rights, or every song is cleared but your leads can't stay on pitch.
Dream cast, never come back if we don't do that right.
Sweet. Okay. And then this next game is also just like quick rapid fire one. I'm going to say a word and then you just tell me what actor comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answer, just whatever thought. Okay. Menacing.
Willem Dafoe.
Yeah. Methodical.
Jason Isaacs, sorry, this worker. Very methodical.
Iconic.
Jack Nicholson.
Endearing.
I'm going to say George Clooney.
Versatile.
Meryl Streep.
And then we'll end it with magnetic.
Julia Roberts.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, so now we are getting into our final section where we're chatting about your film, Juliet and Romeo. I have just a brief description here. Based on the real story that inspired Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, follows the greatest love story of all time, set as an original pop musical. I want to know what inspired you to turn the Romeo and Juliet story into a pop musical. Where did this idea come about?
So the origin is really back on stage. And I had directed, when I was a younger artist, I had directed probably 3 or 4 times on stage, Romeo and Juliet. And I was always such an enormous fan of Shakespeare and always chose that play specifically of Shakespeare's because of how relevant I thought the themes were. That being said, I have to be honest by saying, first of all, pentameter is tough for audiences. It just is. We all pretend it's not. It's like vegetables. It's tough. So you always got to figure out how do you break over that for an audience. But I also always felt, as brilliant, and it is brilliant, the text was, it left a lot of story unspoken about. You have a character of Rosaline who's not really in the play at all, who we obviously approach quite differently. But who are the parents and why? And what's the relationship with this Mercutio and Tybalt character and why? So I always felt that I had kind of failed on stage because I always felt I wasn't able to find that extra piece. So it was something I was always looking for another way in. I remember sitting years and years, probably 10 years ago with my brother Evan, who wrote all the music for the piece. And I remember asking him, why did he think Shakespeare used iambic pentameter? And he just very quickly off the cuff said, I think that was the poetry of their time. I said, that's interesting. And what do you think the poetry of our time is? And he said pop music. Now, he's one of the big pop music artists. He wrote Halo for Beyonce and SOS for Rhianna. So, of course, he'd say that. But I drilled deeper. He's like, just think about every young person you've ever seen. They live and breathe the heartbeat and the rhythm of this kind of music. It is their inner voice. It is their poetry. And he said, poetry is our time. That led me on a course going, well, that's super interesting. Then I started going through that and started and discovered unbelievably, I don't know why I didn't know this, but that Shakespeare didn't come up with any of Romeo and Juliet. It was 100% taken from about 7 other authors over multiple hundreds of years that came before him. It was written by a British playwright, Arthur Brooke, before him. Before that, it was a French author. Before that, there was 3 different Italian authors, all going back to the real 1301, where historical records seem to suggest these 2 families were really there. This event really happened, and it was happening at the most fascinating time in history, between 1301 and 1303, which was the end of the medieval times, the birth of the Renaissance, and the great battle between the most evil pope in history, Pope Boniface, against the royal family. Suddenly, I'm looking at this incredibly complicated world with all these other stories going on, thinking, well, Shakespeare just did what he did with his source material. Who's to say it was all correct or that it was complete or that he adhered to it exactly? And so once I went down that road, I just started opening up what the world was and who the characters were. And I just lost myself in it completely going, this is a story that I can tell. And I want to tell it with music because that's what this was inspired by. I want it to be the inner voice of these characters, which makes it so human and relatable. And knowing, okay, I'm going to go try to make Romeo and Juliet as a pop musical, and let's see how people react to that. But it really came from understanding how rich the source material actually was.
And had you worked with your brother in this capacity before?
Yeah. So my brother, my baby brother of 8 years, but and we're both now like grown-ups. But we've been working for decades together. We did first ever reality show I did was a reality show for Bravo called Platinum Hit, which was about songwriting. And it was something my brother and I came up with as, let's show what songwriting really is. We did that. We then did a crazy like American Idol, but kids version where no one ever got voted off. We just got to educate these incredibly fabulous, wonderful kids over the course of 15 weeks. And we had Adam Lambert and Leona Lewis and Jennifer Hudson, all these people come in and teach these kids. So we did a lot of stuff like that. We then started developing a bunch of stuff, but it really wasn't until I did Spinning Gold about my dad, where Evan really came in and really crafted the music approach with me. And that's when we really began that music relationship. And then this really became the full blown from an origin point onward. How
convenient to have each other.
Nice. And to be the older brother, because when you need to, you go, hey, younger brother. Exactly.
Okay, let me know if this is true. I saw that this is the first of a planned trilogy. Is that right?
It is.
Oh, so what can we expect from the rest of the installment?
I can't tell you that. No, but when I started, I literally was saying, look, if this one's going to be Star Wars, then we're going to move through Empire Strikes Back and end with Revenge of the Jedi. So we are going to, what I can tell you is the real story of what was happening with these families at this time between the church and state, between these 2 years of 1301 to 1303 was extraordinarily exciting, really fascinating, and changed the course of the world over this two-year period of time and really established and created what we now know to be Europe and that part of the world. And so it is a big, fun, sprawling, crazy adventure with a lot of fascinating characters that you probably wouldn't expect going into all sorts of different directions.
That's very cool. And you touched on this a little, but you shot on location in Verona. Yeah. How did that influence the feel of the movie?
Boy, shooting in Italy influenced everything, but also we would never have made it without shooting in Italy. So when we began, we knew we were going to be castles. We knew, unlike many other adaptations of Shakespeare, and that's also an interesting thing too, knowing we were adapting it, going, oh no, can we adapt it? But everything is adapted for Shakespeare. Like this Romeo and Juliet is in World War II, and this one is on the planet Mars, and this one's underwater. I mean, Baz Luhrmann, it's in present day Venice, California, not Venice, Italy, and there's no horses, there's cars, and there's no swords, there's guns. So there's always an adaptation. But for me, what I thought interestingly, other than Zeffirelli's original, there was very few of these Shakespearean takes that really set it back in the proper period at the real world and didn't make it feel stodgy and like you're in a museum or on a soundstage. So from the beginning, I wanted it to be a muscular piece. I wanted it to be a physical piece, which meant I wanted to shoot in real locations across the board, no sound stages. We never put up a single green screen, no green screen. We were going in the real world, in the freezing rain and the cold on mountainsides. I wanted these kids riding on horses, and we didn't use a single stunt double for fights. We wanted them all to really learn. We spent months with these young cast training on horses, training on fighting, training on swordplay, training for dancing, training for singing, all in Italy. So once we got there, it was so easy to find the appropriate settings, because there are places like Castellaquarto, which became our Verona, which literally you could turn a camera in any direction and you'd swear it was 1301. Now, ultimately, yes, we had trucks and cranes and lights we had to erase, but being in the real place informed me, informed every cast member, informed absolutely everything about the production, and it just wouldn't be the same film.
That's awesome. I wonder how you were able to blend the pop music and then this historic setting. How did you make it not feel disjointed? You know?
Well, first of all, I hope we did, and I hope people won't feel it's disjointed. And that was from the jump, the most important goal. Big part of that was the way we integrated score ultimately with song. Because as you start hearing the score, and as you start, which is very lush and beautifully recorded in Italy with a wonderful Italian orchestra, but it's this wonderful, lush, glorious score, but all has these elements and components that are mirroring, reflecting, or seeding thoughts about the songs that ultimately we're going to get to. So once we get to the songs, it never feels like, oh, everything has changed. It feels like everything has just effortlessly become that. And the way the characters themselves interact with the world in many places throughout the film, we tried to find moments, locations where it's Friday night and the kids are out and they're hanging out and they're dancing. And so there's someone up there singing and there's a band over there playing. So it was a musical world, which then gave light and gave way for them to start expressing themselves musically. So hopefully it's the consistency of tone where it never feels like this is one movie and then there's a song and this is another movie and that's a song. It really should, I hope, feel like it's all part of the same thought.
Oh, that's awesome. And so this musical is independently produced, which is rare for musicals.
Sure is.
Right? Yeah. So can you tell me a bit about that experience?
Yes, in today's world, doing anything, bold or not bold, frankly, is virtually impossible. Fewer things are being made, fewer companies are involved in it. I personally have been involved in the independent space for the last 35 years. Every time I sort of go back, and I have, to the networks and the studios, you just end up sort of developing from here to here over a couple of years. Like, does it get better? Does it get worse? Just kind of from here to here. And things don't necessarily happen. In the independent space is where you can actually make them happen. But yes, you're right. Very, very hard. We very, very fortunately had launched a new company with my partners, my producing partner, Jessica Martins, and my producing partner, Chris Tordo. We had launched a new company called Hero Entertainment Partners specifically to make this initial franchise and to start seeding this independent space for these kinds of big, bold, studio-looking films that are crafted and created in an independent model. So we were very fortunate that we had launched a new company where we had the choice to do that. But yes, it's bold and scary and challenging and all those things.
And exciting.
And exciting.
Okay, to close us out today, for the listener who, at this point, I'm assuming they haven't seen your film when this comes out, do you have any either other films you could compare it to in saying, like, if you liked this movie, you'll like Juliet and Romeo, or even just some descriptors for the type of movie this is?
It sounds, it sounds maybe too bold. I do think it is a very original piece, thankfully held, in place by one of the most well-known stories and set of characters in the history of literature. So I think people certainly could go, oh, another Romeo and Juliet. That would be a mistake. And so the fact that it also is Romeo and Juliet, I think, is comforting for some, but for some it might be off-putting. We hope people really understand it is a different kind of piece. It is, historically, Shakespeare's been tougher to watch. historically today, people are making darker and darker pieces. And I know what our story is ultimately about. And I know people will go, but leave that aside for a second. This is a escape. This is a thrilling feast, I think, for the heart and the eyes and the senses. This is, we even say in some of the marketing material, escape, go to the movies again, experience fun again. When I think of things like Greatest Showman, which is kind of own piece, I think there's a lot of what we're doing that is similar in that space. But I think similarly, you could look at something like La La Land, which is a lot more about inner voice. And I think that was sort of interesting. But I also think you take a look at something like, Coppola's Outsiders, or even the new version of that, which is so empowering to the sort of youthful energy and the relationships that only exist within that younger group, within their own particular age group. And so much of what we did was empower both Romeo and his family, all the Montagues and Juliet and all the Capulets, to be, these are real people, these are real families, these are real friends. And so it feels like much more of a story and much more relatable to people than perhaps they would initially think. But I think if they go into it going, boy, I had a lot of fun going to see Greatest Showman, I had a lot of fun seeing La La Land, or I had a fun seeing Tick, Tick, Boom, I think there'll be a similar experience.
That's great. That was a great answer.
Thank you.
Well, that is all I really have for you today. I want to thank you for coming on. I had a great time chatting with you. You're very well spoken. I feel like you're a really, really great storyteller, which obviously makes sense for what you do. But it was really fun hearing your thoughts and your opinions. As we close out, is this in select theaters, or what's the best way for those listening to see your film?
In this crazy time of independence, no, it's not select theaters. We're releasing it wide, so it should be everywhere. Amazing. around the country, wherever you want to go see. And please, if you are a cinema lover, if you're a lover of anything in this space, I know it sounds silly, go see it opening weekend. You have no idea the impact that has on filmmakers like us, on movies like ours, and on the business itself, which needs the fans who want more movies for them to actually go early and go fast and go to the theaters so that we can keep making them.
I hear that. I think, we have a big film following that feels very much the same way. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And
so much.
I'm sure we'll chat another day in the future.
Absolutely.
Good evening.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. To stay in touch, follow our Instagram page at It's Intermission Time and share with your friends. As always, Intermission is produced by Jazeel Chu and Olivia Dean, and of course, hosted by yours truly, Megan Braun. This episode is brought to you by The Synagogue.